Welcome to English Avenue YouTube, the channel to learn English the easy way. Let's start. From the vast, untamed steppes of Mongolia to the grand palaces of conquered kingdoms, the life of Genghis Khan was anything but ordinary. His rise from a helpless boy abandoned in the harsh wilderness to the ruler of the most expansive empire in history is a testament to sheer determination, strategic brilliance, and an iron will that refused to be broken. The mention of his name alone sent entire nations into a state of panic, and with good reason. He was not just a conqueror but a force of nature, a man whose vision and brutality reshaped the world forever. His legacy is one of both admiration and horror. While he brought unprecedented destruction, wiping entire civilizations off the map, he also laid the foundations for trade, law, and unity in a way no ruler before him had done. His empire stretched from the shores of the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, uniting distant cultures under his rule. He transformed the Mongolian tribes from scattered, warring factions into an unstoppable war machine, disciplined and ruthless, yet shockingly efficient. And yet, despite his ability to conquer, his origins were as humble as they were harsh. He was not born into a life of luxury or power. He did not inherit a kingdom. Instead, he emerged from nothing, forging his destiny with blood, sweat, and an unyielding drive to overcome every obstacle in his path. Genghis Khan's story is not just about war. It is about survival, betrayal, revenge, and ultimate domination. It is the tale of a man who lost everything, was cast aside by his own people, and was left to fend for himself in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on earth. But rather than succumb to despair, he rose from the depths of suffering with a fire that could not be extinguished. He was a boy who learned early that mercy was a weakness, and that power was the only law that mattered. He faced starvation, the bitter cold of Mongolian winters, and the cruelty of rival clans who sought to erase his very existence. But he endured, and in doing so, he carved a path that would lead him to immortality. So today, we delve into the legend of Genghis Khan. As we unfold his story, you will witness his transformation from a nameless child to a world-shaking ruler, one who could bring even the most powerful empires to their knees. And as you immerse yourself in this gripping historical saga, you will not only gain insight into one of the most remarkable figures in human history, but also enhance your command of the English language. With each sentence, you will expand your vocabulary, refine your comprehension, and grow in fluency. Prepare yourself for a journey through time, where power was won with the sword, where loyalty was often paid in blood, and where one man's vision would shape the course of history. This is the story of Genghis Khan, the warrior, the ruler, the legend. Temujin's birth was not marked by grandeur, nor was it celebrated with the wealth and comfort that other rulers of history might have known. Instead, he entered a world of turmoil, where survival was an everyday battle, and the only certainty was uncertainty itself. The Mongolian steppes were vast and merciless, an unending stretch of land where the wind howled like a hungry beast, and the changing seasons were as deadly as any enemy. The winters were so brutal that the cold could seep into a man's bones, freezing him from the inside out, while summers turned the land into an arid wasteland, where water was scarce and the blazing sun could claim lives just as easily. The people who inhabited these lands were not city dwellers, nor were they protected by stone walls or great fortresses. Instead, they were nomadic tribes, constantly moving, forever in search of fertile land and fresh water for their livestock. These tribes did not live in peace. Each one fought to expand its territory, raiding others for horses, food, and women. Alliances were fragile, and betrayals were common. The Mongolian steppes were a land where only the strong could rule, and the weak were cast aside or slaughtered. It was into this unforgiving reality that Temujin was born, a child who would one day grow to command the greatest empire the world had ever seen. His father, Yasujii, was a formidable warrior, a leader of his people, and a man who knew the weight of war. His hands were stained with the blood of enemies, and his reputation as a fighter was well known among the rival tribes. The name Temujin was not given out of affection but as a symbol of power. It was the name of a conquered enemy, a defeated foe whose life had been claimed by Yasuji's sword. In the Mongolian way, this was an act of dominance, a declaration that his son was born under the shadow of conquest, and should one day rise to be a conqueror himself. But despite being the son of a chieftain, Temujin's early years were far from privileged. Unlike the children of kings who were raised in the safety of palaces and taught the art of diplomacy, Temujin grew up in a world where survival was his only teacher. There were no luxuries, no comforts, only the raw, untamed reality of life on the steppes. His family lived in a small tent, their home as temporary as the changing winds. Every day, they fought to gather enough food, relying on their livestock and whatever they could hunt to sustain themselves. Even as a child, Temujin understood that strength was the only law in Mongolia. Power dictated everything: who lived, who died, who led, and who was forgotten. He watched as his father negotiated with allies and clashed with enemies, and he learned that trust was dangerous, for even the closest allies could turn into traitors overnight. He was not shielded from the violence that surrounded him. He witnessed raids, saw warriors cut down in battle, and understood that in this world, mercy was often a fatal weakness. Little did he know that soon, his own life would be thrown into chaos, testing him in ways that no child should ever have to endure. Temujin's journey was only beginning, but from the moment he opened his eyes to the ruthless Mongolian landscape, his fate had already been written in blood. From that moment on, the world Temujin had known, one where he was the son of a respected chieftain, where he had the protection of a powerful tribe, was gone forever. The very people who had once sworn loyalty to his father now turned their backs on his family, leaving them to face the brutal Mongolian wilderness alone. Without warriors to protect them, without a herd of horses to sustain them, and without shelter beyond the thin fabric of their tent, Temujin and his family became outcasts. His mother, Holun, a woman of extraordinary resilience, refused to surrender to despair. With her husband gone and no tribe to support them, she took on the role of both father and mother, ensuring that her children survived against impossible odds. She taught them how to dig through frozen earth in search of edible roots, how to trap small animals for food, and how to endure hunger when there was nothing to eat. When they were lucky, they found birds' eggs or caught wild hares. But there were times when they went days without a real meal, surviving only on whatever scraps they could gather. The winters were especially merciless. The cold winds howled across the open plains, cutting through their ragged clothing, seeping into their bones. Their hands turned stiff with frost, their lips cracked until they bled, and the nights felt like an eternity, where sleep was an enemy because it made the body more vulnerable to the deadly chill. But despite the suffering, Despite the hunger that clawed at their stomachs and the exhaustion that threatened to break them, Temujin held on to the last words his father had spoken to him. Trust no one. Strength is the only protection you have. These words became his guiding principle. They fueled his determination, hardened his heart, and set the foundation for the man he would become. Temujin understood, even as a boy, that the world did not favor the weak. There was no mercy in the steppes, no kindness for those who could not defend themselves. He watched his mother fight every day to keep them alive, never once allowing despair to take hold, never begging for pity, and he absorbed her strength like a sponge. However, the harshness of survival was not his only challenge. Temujin had an older half-brother, Bektar, who believed that, as the eldest male, he had the right to dominate the family. He would take the best portions of food for himself, leaving the others with barely enough to survive. This injustice did not sit well with Temujin. Each time he saw his mother and younger siblings suffer from hunger, while Bektar took more than his share, resentment burned within him like a slow-growing fire. One fateful day, that fire erupted into action, fueled by anger and the belief that true leadership must be earned, not taken by birthright. Temujin decided that he would not allow Bektar to continue ruling over them with greed. Armed with a bow, his hands steady despite the weight of his decision, he took aim at his half-brother and released the arrow. Bektar fell to the ground, lifeless, his blood soaking into the frozen earth. Temujin did not flinch. He did not weep. He did not regret. Instead, he stood over the body and reaffirmed what his father had told him. Only strength mattered. That day, he crossed a line from which there was no return. He had made his first real choice as a warrior, one that would define the path he would take for the rest of his life. From then on, he was no longer just a boy struggling to survive. He was a predator, not prey. The world had tried to break him, but instead, it had forged him into something stronger, something far more dangerous. Temujin had tasted power, and he would never let go of it again. From that moment forward, something within Temujin shifted. He was no longer just a boy struggling to survive in the harsh Mongolian steppes. He had taken control of his fate, proving to himself that power belonged to those bold enough to seize it. The world had shown him no mercy, so he learned to return the favor. With Bektar's lifeless body lying before him, he did not feel regret or sorrow. Instead, a deep, unshakable truth solidified in his mind. Strength was the only law that mattered. Temujin knew that in the unforgiving world he was born into, leadership was not inherited. It was earned through blood, strategy, and unwavering determination. His father had once been a powerful tribal leader, yet the moment he was gone, his family had been discarded like worthless scraps. His mother had fought tirelessly to keep them alive, but survival alone was not enough. If they wanted to truly live, not merely exist as beggars, waiting for mercy that would never come, then someone had to rise and take what was theirs. And that someone had to be him. The death of his brother sent a clear message to his family. Temujin was not weak, and he would not tolerate betrayal or greed from anyone, not even his own blood. This act of defiance marked his first step toward becoming the leader he was destined to be. He had made a brutal but necessary choice, and from that day on, he embraced the idea that hesitation was the enemy of power. Those who waited, hoping for kindness or fairness, would always be at the mercy of those strong enough to claim dominance. But his trials were far from over. The Mongolian steppes did not reward ambition without challenge, and the enemies he had yet to face would test his resolve in ways he could never have imagined. Betrayal, captivity, and battles that would determine not just his survival, but the fate of an entire empire lay ahead. Yet, with the weight of his father's last words echoing in his mind, "Trust no one. Strength is the only protection you have." Temujin knew he would not falter. He had already taken his first step into the ruthless world of power, and nothing, not starvation, not rival clans, not even the vast, unrelenting wilderness, would stop him from carving his own destiny. Temujin had endured the harshest trials that the Mongolian steppes could throw at him. Yet each hardship only sharpened his resolve, transforming him into a force of nature. His escape from captivity was not just a return to freedom. It was a declaration to the world that he would never again be chained, beaten, or treated as less than what he was destined to be. He had stared death in the face, felt the sting of humiliation, and emerged stronger. As he collapsed into his mother's tent, his body trembling from exhaustion and blood loss, his mind remained unbroken. He would never be weak again. But escaping from his captors was just the beginning. The Mongolian steppes were not a place where a lone warrior could rise to power overnight. Temujin had learned that power was not about titles or birthright. It was about loyalty, strategy, and the ability to inspire men to follow you into battle. He could not do this alone. If he wanted to rule, he needed soldiers. If he wanted to reshape Mongolia, he needed people who believed in his vision. Temujin did not seek out warriors in the traditional way. The old Mongolian nobility expected loyalty through bloodlines, but he rejected this outdated thinking. He did not care about lineage. He cared about skill, loyalty, and an unbreakable will to fight. He sought out the outcasts, the abandoned, and the warriors who had suffered under the endless tribal wars. He offered them something no other leader had before: a purpose greater than survival. Among those who joined him was a man named Jamuka, a warrior whose combat skills and sharp mind rivaled Temujin's own. They were alike in many ways, both ambitious, both determined, both wanting to unite the Mongolian tribes. They became more than allies. They became Anda, blood brothers, swearing an oath of loyalty that could not be broken. Together, they gathered warriors, trained them, and built an army that struck fear into rival clans. For years, they fought side by side, their names becoming legendary throughout the steppes. But ambition is a dangerous thing, and the more powerful Temujin became, the more uneasy Jamuka grew. At first, it was only whispers, murmurs among his men that Temujin was gaining too much influence. But whispers turned into doubts, and doubts turned into resentment. Temujin believed in a merit-based system, where warriors could rise through the ranks based on their skill and loyalty. Jamuka, however, clung to the old ways, believing that noble bloodlines should always hold power. As their followers grew, their differences became impossible to ignore. What had once been a brotherhood was now a rivalry. What had once been a shared dream had splintered into two competing visions for Mongolia. Their inevitable clash was no longer a matter of if, it was only a matter of when. The war between Temujin and Jamuka was not just a battle of armies. It was a clash of ideologies, of two visions for Mongolia's future. Jamuka believed in the old ways, where noble birth determined leadership, and power was passed down through bloodlines. Temujin, however, saw things differently. He believed that strength came from merit, that any warrior, regardless of birth, could rise through the ranks if he proved himself in battle. This radical idea made him a beacon of hope for the outcasts, the oppressed, and the ambitious men who had long been overlooked by the Mongolian aristocracy. But it also made him a threat to those who clung to tradition, and Jamukha was determined to put an end to his rise before it was too late. The battle that followed was brutal beyond comprehension. Jamukha's forces, outnumbering Temujin's by 10,000, launched a relentless assault, using superior positioning and numbers to crush Temujin's troops. Temujin fought with the ferocity of a man who refused to accept defeat, his warriors striking with precision, using the speed and agility of their horses to weave through the battlefield. But numbers do not lie. Slowly, inevitably, the tide turned against him. His forces were surrounded, his men slaughtered, and those who were captured met a fate so horrifying that it would be remembered for generations. Jamukha, determined to send a message, ordered that no mercy be shown. Thousands of Temujin's warriors were not just executed, they were boiled alive. Their screams echoed across the Mongolian steppes, a warning to any who dared oppose Jamukha's rule. It was a display of cruelty that even the Mongols, no strangers to bloodshed, found excessive. Instead of instilling fear, it sowed the seeds of doubt. Warriors who had once followed Jamukha without question began to reconsider. Was this the kind of leader they wanted? Temujin had been defeated, but he had never resorted to such barbaric punishments. He had promised his followers a new order, a world where loyalty mattered more than lineage, where warriors could fight for something greater than themselves. Slowly the tides began to shift. Jamukha's brutality alienated his own men, and one by one, they abandoned him. Warriors who had once fought against Temujin now sought him out, pledging their allegiance, not just to a man but to his vision. Defeat had not broken him. It had made him stronger. Years passed and Temujin rebuilt his forces. He was patient, biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when he finally returned, it was Jamukha who stood alone. The man who had once commanded thousands now found himself without an army, without allies, without hope. Captured and brought before Temujin, Jamukha expected the worst. He had shown no mercy, and he expected none in return. But what happened next stunned everyone. Temujin, now stronger than ever, did not seek vengeance. He did not torture Jamukha, did not make him suffer as he had suffered. Instead, he offered him a swift and honorable death. In that moment, he proved to all of Mongolia that he was not just a conqueror. He was a ruler. He was not driven by blind revenge, but by a greater purpose. He was the leader that Mongolia needed. And so in the year 1206, all the scattered Mongolian tribes came together, united under one banner. They crowned him with a new name, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. No longer just a warrior, no longer just a man seeking survival. He had become something greater, a force that would reshape the world itself. But Genghis Khan's ambitions did not stop with Mongolia. He did not see borders, only lands waiting to be claimed. His eyes scanned the horizon, and with an unshakable conviction he declared, "The world shall be mine." This was only the beginning. What followed would be the greatest conquest in history. An empire that stretched from the heart of Asia to the very edges of Europe. A domain built not just on war, but on strategy, diplomacy, and a vision that would change civilization forever. This is the legacy of Genghis Khan, the boy who was abandoned, the warrior who refused to break, and the ruler who took the world by storm.